Now, our next speaker is Chris Larsen. He is the co-founder and executive chairman at Ripple. Ever since I first heard him speak, and then when he visited Level 39 in London, the blockchain lab, we'd have this privilege of watching this true gentleman of the industry and his team unfold his vision of a world where things like financial inclusion and trust are inherently built into the code of the internet, and ultimately the way that society behaves. He thinks that we're witnessing this Cambrian explosion of trust and interoperability. Today, we hope that Chris will share some more of that vision and aspiration, and maybe even go a little bit beyond that. Please welcome, big hand for Chris Larsen.
Again, great to be here. I know we don't have a lot of time, so what I thought I would do, I'll talk briefly about what Ripple is and what Ripple does and kind of what our mission is. But then we'll step back a little bit and give you a little bit of perspective on kind of what we see this blockchain revolution really representing, what we think the big thing is that we're trying to pay attention to and how it's going to change the world. And then I'll talk briefly about the core technologies that we're betting on, given that vision that we see kind of before us. So first of all, Ripple is one of the first blockchain companies. We're about 240 employees, headquartered in San Francisco, which many of you know is a city about 3 hours north of here, maybe 4 hours. Okay, sometimes that gets a laugh. We have eight offices throughout the world, and we're growing very rapidly. We're really focused on the enterprise applications of blockchain technology and blockchain derivative technologies, specifically for cross-border payments. We think everything starts with a payment, so a lot of the use cases that we're talking about, we think they really need to have a payments solution first, and then we can really kind of grow from there. And we're really focused on how this technology can solve problems. And with cross-border payments is clearly a problem, and I think that's why we've been successful with over 100 announced production deals with enterprise companies throughout the world, and that continues to grow. So we had a record Q2, and we're just incredibly excited about the adoption that we're seeing. I should point out that these are not innovation lab deals. These are not experiments. These are full production deals. Where those teams had to evaluate whether or not this was going to increase my bottom line, is going to really improve the way I do business, and that's a lot harder to do. So we're really pleased with that. And again, the problem that we're trying to solve is cross-border payments in the world they're antiquated, right? They're built on 1970s technology that just doesn't work in today's world. It's incredible that it takes 3 to 5 days to move value across the world today. You could literally put cash in a FedEx envelope, mail it to where you're trying to get to. It would be perfectly tracked. It would get there way faster. That's kind of crazy. The costs of cross-border payments are just unacceptably high, not just the fees that banks and their customers have to pay to correspondents and lifting fees, but all the capital that's tied up in the global system. Because payments are so slow, capital is just sitting there, and it's incredibly wasteful. And then most shocking of all is the failure rates of cross-border payments today. About 6% of cross-border payments fail. You're talking 1/9 of reliability. I mean, can you imagine if 6% of all your Google searches failed? We wouldn't have an internet as we know it today. So this is just unacceptable in 2018, and it's got to change. So what we have done at Ripple is we built something called RippleNet. That's really a combination of 3 core products, which I'll talk about one of them in a little bit. But just the combination of those products, RippleNet allows enterprises, payment companies, remittance companies to enjoy on-demand, real-time payments in seconds, incredibly low cost, with, very importantly, no possibility for failures. There's atomic transactions. They can't fail in the middle. There's no settlement risk. And that gives their customers a much better experience. So the banks and their customers, they know in today's world they've got to be lightning fast, and this is really allows them to do that. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. That's a little bit about the company. Let me step back and talk a little bit about what we see this blockchain revolution really representing. Obviously, there is this is the most hyped area in technology today. It is the most attention fintech has ever gotten, right? It's the first time fintech has been truly global. So, clearly there's a lot of overhype. There's a lot of projects that are going to fail. I think we already know cryptocurrencies are not going to replace all fiat currencies, but they're going to be supplemental. We're not going to be buying our avocados, on IBM's blockchain, right? But it may improve some things, right? And we're not going to tokenize everything, right? We're going to tokenize things where it solves a problem, but not everything's going to be tokenized. So clearly there's a lot of hype. But you got to admit, something fundamental is happening here. I think we all feel that in our bones, right? There's something very big. You're not going to have this much money, this much talent globally that's going into this space unless something really fundamental is afoot. And the way we see it is we think this really represents the final step in globalization. And I think we all know globalization has not been very popular lately. At the same time, I think we all know there's no future for our world unless we're more global, we're more interoperating more on an international basis. We've got to fix some things. Globalization is not a bad thing. We would just say it's an incomplete thing, right? It's a work in progress. And we kind of use the example of, you can't have fire without fuel, oxygen, and heat. And we think you can't have globalization that works without a global system in three key things: data, goods, and money. And the truth is we only have that today in two of those things, data and goods. We don't have it in money. So globalization is kind of a lot of potential, but it's not really delivering yet on what it could do. We've got to complete this picture. And if you think about it, these other two things, they're fairly recent as well. Data and goods, we didn't always have a global system of data and goods. And think about how, I love talking about shipping containers, so let me talk about shipping containers. Think about how shipping goods was before the invention of the shipping container. Incredibly inefficient, incredibly labor-intensive, huge bottleneck for the world. The dock workers could go on strike, everything shuts down. Goods would have to come into a port, they'd have to be unpacked and repacked, shipped out a completely different way. It was a mess, and this was clearly holding back the world. And then along comes this super simple technology, the shipping container, just a metal box, and boom, suddenly every port in the world, every city is interoperable to every other city. Every ship interoperates with every train and every truck, every warehouse. Totally changed the way the world works. By the way, it costs now 4 cents to move a shirt all the way across the world from, say, Vietnam, China to the US, 4 cents. That's incredible. And importantly, this was not because of the invention of a new shipping company. It was the invention of a simple standard, a simple box, a simple technology that everybody could use that was endlessly scalable and that was simple enough for people to agree on. It led to completely different shipping companies that the world has never seen before, and it led to a complete transformation of ports and the way cities operated, mostly run by robots, not by people. So it changed everything, about a 700% increase since the 1950s in global trade because of it. That's a huge win. We all know what happened with data. Sometime after the shipping container, along comes another standard, IP. Before that, of course, we had a world of different networks that didn't interoperate with each other. It was hard to communicate. It was expensive to communicate. A lot of people were cut out. And then, of course, along comes IP, a very simple standard that the whole world could get together around. And boom, now 3 billion plus people are communicating basically for free, to anybody with a single address. So totally a game changer. About, 20% increase in GDP over the last 5 years because of it. Again, this was not because of a new communications company. This was because of a simple standard IP that everybody could get around, but of course led to fantastically new communication companies. We now know trillion-dollar communication companies, and completely changed the way the world works. Okay, so 2 of those are complete, but of course, money is not. Money has not had its shipping container moment. It's still stuck in the 70s or maybe before. And that is really holding back the world, right? So trillions of dollars, again, being wasted. I use the example of 4 cents to move a shirt all the way across the world. Pretty much costs nothing to send a message all the way across the world. I'll give you one example of an Airbnb host in Tanzania. He's charging $29 to a customer through that platform. By the time the money has gotten to that host, there's an actual or actual example, $9. So $20 to move the value, 4 cents to move the shirt, almost nothing to move data. So obviously this has to change. And of course, the implications of this lack of interoperability of money is, even all of you in this room, wealthy people, you can't send 50 euros without it all being chewed up in fees. Now, of course, there are some applications that try to, that sort of mask this, and they do a great job of it. But what they're doing, of course, without infrastructure for the whole world, is they're absorbing settlement risks. They're eating the cost. That's not scalable, right? So this has to change. And of course, the other problem with this, according to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they say that the 2 billion people in the developing world, they need to be able to send 50 cents cross-border if they're really going to be participants in the global economy. You can't do that in a system built in the 70s, SWIFT, correspondent banking. There's not enough profit in it, so banks won't engage here. There's no profit in it. And of course, we can't even get started on all the excitement that a lot of people in this room have talked about, and I think is absolutely correct, machine-to-machine payments, right? So that robots, machines are full economic actors. They may need to be able, in applications as well, they may need to be able to send 1/100th of a euro, 1,000th of an RMB. You can't do that in this system today. So this has all got to change, and I think that is what represents the excitement of blockchain. I'm saying blockchain in quotes, that is this possibly the shipping container for money? Does this complete the picture of globalization, the third kind of key leg of the stool? I would say yes and no, right? So I think right now the conversation is too much around blockchains and digital assets. I would kind of broaden this out and say what's really happening here is the creation of an internet of value. And that's going to be a little bit blockchain, so it's going to be a lot blockchains, maybe a third of it. It's going to be a lot, though, about interoperability protocols, which isn't getting enough play yet. I think the industry is going to start talking a lot more about that. Just like we used to talk about AOL CompuServe, and then we switched to talk about the net. I think interoperability, it's going to be shifting the balance a little bit more that way. And of course, smart contracts are going to play a picture there. So it's those three things. But blockchains and digital assets are a core part of it as well. So let me talk about what technologies we're making a bet on. Let me talk first about which blockchain, you can probably guess which one, that we're making a bet on. So first of all, we think the key requirements for any blockchain that's going to be part of this new global system got to be open source so that it can be stress tested, everybody can see what's going on. It's got to be decentralized, so there's no counterparty. It's got to be permissionless, so anybody can run a node, anybody can run a validator, anybody could be a miner. It's got to be reliable and secure. It's got to have a lot of history where it's worked. For payments, which again we think are the killer app, we think that's where it all starts. For payments, we think that has additional requirements. You've got to have settlement predictability. You've got to have consistent low costs. You've got to have high throughput. And we think you have to have low energy consumption. Let me talk a little bit then about how we see these and why we're betting, as you may have guessed, on the XRP ledger. And XRP is the digital asset of choice when we're talking about the blockchain component of this Internet of Value. XRP clearly has, among the majors, the lowest transaction costs. It is the fastest, about 3 seconds to settle, and it has the highest throughput of the major blockchains. Now, again, throughput, important to, I think, realize that, look, most of transactions eventually are going to be off-ledger in some fashion. They're going to be using payment channels, XRP payment channels, Lightning Network, whatever it is. However, the throughput is still very important because at some point, someone's got to settle to the ledger, right? So the more throughput, the lower cost, the more efficient it's going to be. And equally as important, you've got to have this predictability of settlement. So XRP is not just the fastest of the majors, but it's actually very consistent, about 3 seconds, and the variability there is very low as compared with Ether, Bitcoin, for example, which are going to have longer close periods, but importantly also much larger variability in its close. So that randomness is problematic for payments and payment providers. The other key thing is that the blockchain will have to be deterministic. that can't be changed, right? And not probabilistic. Bitcoin is a probabilistic blockchain. So that's going to be important for payment providers as well. Energy consumption, this is actually very important. So I think as we know, Bitcoin uses a lot of energy. So does Ether today until it switches to a proof of stake. So we're looking, Bitcoin, I know there's different estimates here, but using about as much as the energy of the Czech Republic today, Ether about as much as the country of Jordan. The XRP ledger, because it's using a consensus system, is using a de minimis amount of electricity. I think here with the example, it uses as much as the town of Oatman, if anybody's from here. You get a special prize, Oatman, Arizona, population 140, so a de minimis amount of electricity. Obviously, that's better for the world, right? You're not polluting as much. But very importantly, that means that you're not wasting your seigniorage on, for utility companies and for mining. It can instead go into the ecosystem, which hopefully is liquidity at the end of the day. I think liquidity is really what drives value here. So that's an important feature there. And that's why we have chosen to build products on the XRP ledger, products like XRapid, that's a component of RippleNet. That allows payment providers to lower the cost of liquidity for their global payments. So it allows, for example, a bank that's trying to send money to Mexico to use XRP as the intermediate currency. They don't necessarily have to hold XRP, but it's used to make things very efficiently. So in this example, a customer going to a remittance company in the US, those dollars now are exchanged into XRP through Bittrex, which is a great exchange. It's immediately settled in XRP in seconds. Bitso is an exchange that provides an exchange between XRP and Mexican peso. That now can be delivered to a Mexican bank, which, because they have a real-time system in Mexico, allows that to go into the customer's account very quickly. This now allows payment providers, banks, and their customers to move value in 1 to 2 minutes versus days, or a process that might mask those days but have to charge for the settlement risk and the cost. So that provides a lot of efficiency. However, that's not the complete picture, right? So let's talk now about the other components of this Internet of Value. Again, blockchains, digital assets, very, very important, has to be an efficient one. Equally as important, though, is this, again, a big problem in payments is you don't have interoperability between networks. So it's really tough to move value between either networks or countries, and that goes for blockchains as well, right? And of course, blockchains can't solve this problem, right? Because blockchains are networks themselves. As networks, they can't be a network of networks. In fact, they even make the problem worse because now there's more of them, right? So you have more networks than have interoperability. So we need some kind of an internetworking protocol for payments that is going to connect all of these various networks and can do multi-hop. You have to move away from bilateral agreements, for example. Our bet is that interledger protocol is going to be the protocol of choice for interoperability. And the way this works, this is actually a derivative of blockchains. You wouldn't have had interledger protocol unless there had been Bitcoin and other blockchains. And it uses cryptographic conditions so that one network can send value to another network without anybody in between. So cryptographic conditions have to be met before value can move. It settles instantly. And it can be used in any ledger. It can be used in a central, HSBC, Bank of America's ledgers, Bitcoin, a distributed ledger, anything. It can move any type of value, dollars, RMB, Bitcoin, Ether, XRP, gold, whatever. Any kind of value can be moved. It's a protocol that's been underway for many, many years. It's a completely open protocol. It's as decentralized as you can possibly get. There's a group called the WC3 that is helping with the standard around the protocol. There's almost 300 organizations that are contributors to it. So our bet is that this is going to be a successful interoperability protocol, a key component of this Internet of Value. And the way we see this is, again, we're talking a lot about blockchains, almost like we used to talk about AOL and CompuServe. But we really think the architecture here is going to look a lot like internet architecture, where you have the networks on the bottom, all interoperating through a common IP protocol. You have the transport layers, then you have the applications. We think that's exactly how this is going to play out with this Internet of Value, where you're going to have the ledgers at the bottom, whether that be a bank's ledger, a remittance company ledger, a mobile money, blockchains, of course, all interoperating through interledger ILP, for example. I won't go into the transport layers, but the applications would be at the top. So we think that's a good model for how this is going to play out. But I think the conversation is going to start shifting to be a little bit more inclusive of blockchains, interoperability, and then finally, the last part, smart contracts. So big believers that also smart contracts will play a key role. Our bet would be on a technology called Codius, kind of a derivative of Intraledger. The differences here between, and so we're already getting some really good scale, the differences here between, let's say, smart contracts on Ether, which have to be on that blockchain, using that currency, using a specific language, is it's completely neutral. It can be used, again, on any blockchain. It can be used as a hosting protocol. It can use any language. It can use any currency. So we think that's going to be an important last component. We think all three of those things, the blockchains, the interoperability, and the smart contracts, equal an Internet of Value. I don't know if you want to use an analogy. I guess the blockchains are like these new fancy ports. Intraledger is like the shipping container, and I guess the smart contracts are like the robots, moving around the port, I guess, if you want to use that same analogy. And we think that this now becomes the platform for tons of other things, right? So when we're talking about lending, we're talking about securities, those really can't happen until you get the fundamentals of that payment platform, that Internet of Value completed. So I know we're just about out of time, and I do apologize. I've got to race back up to the city for another event I'm going to be super late for. But I want to thank you all for being here today.